And welcome back to the travel adventures of Mr. Sneaky Duck and Edgar Allan Crow, Kyoto, Osaka 2. This is eBook page 10. I'm Mr. Rains. This eBook has a lot of notes. If you click on here, your notes will pop up like this. Now, today's agenda, we're going to read aloud, think aloud. We're going to talk about what we learned last time. Then we're going to learn some new information. Questions you should ask yourself when looking at any text. And what is self-interest? That's kind of strange. And something called the rhetorical triangle. So let's start reading. An interesting find at Jishu Jinja. And if you remember, Jinja means temple, a Buddhist temple, and it means that in Japanese. While they were at the Jishu Jinja in Kyoto, Japan, first Edgar, then Mr. Sneaky Duck saw it. It was a giant rabbit, like none of their kind they had ever seen. I don't like to say it around them, but basically, the rabbit looked like a giant stuffed animal. Mr. Duck doesn't like to be labeled. Mr. Crow couldn't help but caw at the top of his crow lungs. What a magnificent being! What's your name? Mr. Crow insisted that he picked up the Japanese language overnight and now understood what the gigantic rabbit was saying. Watashi wa Inaba no Shiro Usagi desu. Now in Japanese, they have a U there, and so it looks like desu, but they don't really pronounce the U very hard, so it's like des. And you can hear it if you listen closely. And this is Inaba no Shiro Usagi. Shiro means white. Usagi means rabbit. Due to the language differences, I couldn't understand him, but Edgar Allan Crow said that the giant rabbit's name was White Rabbit. Or you could say white hare, too. Hare, rabbit, almost the same thing, of Inaba, and was a great helper to a man named Okunishi. This is difficult for me even to say. Oku, so I'm going to divide it. Oku, and then ni nushi. Oku ni nushi. So let's try it again. I got to start way back here. Due to the language differences, I couldn't understand him, but Edgar Allan Crow said that the giant rabbit's name was White Rabbit of Inaba and was a great helper to a man named Oku ni nushi of Inaba. Okay? Now, you see right now that even Mr. Rains sometimes has a difficult time when reading aloud. There are many reasons for that. So, don't think of yourself as any less of a person if you make a mistake when you're reading aloud. But sometimes you may have to start over, just like I did in the last video, in order to read over it again to understand. That's all it's about. Nobody said we had to be perfect. When Mr. Sneaky Duck heard this, he remembered that Oku ni nushi of Inaba was a story of a Japanese god that saved the life of a skinned rabbit. The rabbit got skinned after he tried to trick a crocodile just to get across the river. That sounds crazy. The hare, or rabbit, of Inaba told the croc that he had a larger family. The croc was angry, so the hare of Inaba asked the crocodile to line up his entire family in the river, and he would jump on their backs to count them. He started to hop across the river and began laughing as he was almost to the end. The last croc realized they were tricked and snagged his fur, ripping it right off. Mr. Sneaky Duck seemed to be telling us a crazy, made-up story. He kept talking and said that according to folklore, that just means stories from a long time ago that were passed down from, mother to daughter, and from daughter to her daughter, or father to son. The rabbit was healed by a Japanese god, Okuninushi, and has been helping him since then. So look at this. And so I guess they met this guy, and Edgar Allan Crow, he could not stop looking at the rabbit, man. He was amazed at how wonderful the rabbit was. But what sounds strange about this story is that suddenly this Mr. Crow said that he picked up the Japanese language. Now, I know that crows can learn to speak pretty quickly, but that must mean he's pretty smart, because he understood what that meant. Maybe, or did he? That's one of the things you will have to check in your research for this ebook page 10 quiz. Let's move on really quickly. What we learned last time. Let's look at last time's agenda. If we go to, we practiced knowledge and skills, and the new skills that we had were kind of a lot. We did the Google search skills. Remember, we talked about how to find old newspapers, and we talked about doing things on YouTube, like speeding up or slowing down the video. We talked about primary versus secondary sources, or where you get your information from. And that's about it. If you would like to, you could go back to page 9, notes, and review those and kind of refresh your memory. All right, let's close that because we don't need it anymore. On to the next one. Oh, the new information. Questions you should ask yourself when looking at any text. Let's look at my notes today. 10 questions, it says, to always ask yourself when looking or listening to any text. And when I say text, I mean anything. Video, news article, magazine, anything that gets information to you. Why? Because it's somebody trying to get you to do something or see something or believe something, or maybe even just be entertained by something. In other words, they're trying to get you to laugh, if nothing else. All right. So these are questions that you have to ask yourself when you come across a new web page or a new article or an advertisement trying to advertise something to you, saying something is better or something is more beneficial for you or your family. These are things that you have to ask yourself to see if that's true or not. So let's start. So who wrote it? Who wrote whatever you're reading? See if you can figure that out. Because if you know who wrote it, you kind of know what they believe. Or are they where they're from, their background. Where did this text come from? In other words, is it coming from a newspaper? Is it coming from, is somebody writing it as an original text? Like Wikipedia. If you ask yourself where Wikipedia text comes from, that could come from anybody in the world. So that's why they say it's not a reliable or credible source. What is the text trying to get me to do? So if it's a commercial, obviously they're trying to get you to buy their product. If it's an article about a politician, they're trying to get you to vote for their politician. If it's something about a belief or a policy, they're trying to get you to vote or do something in favor of their policy. What is it trying to get you to feel? Like I said, sometimes it may just try to be making you laugh or something. And what is it trying to make you believe? Sometimes religious types of things want you to believe in a certain way. But more importantly, how is it doing that to me? How is the author trying to change my perspective? How is he trying to change my mind or enforce what I already think? What is he doing or what is she doing that's in her writing or in her speech or even in her pictures or music? What is she doing in order to try to move me or make me believe that what she's saying is true and I need to do it? That's very important, and that's why I spent so much time on how does it do that? How does it get me to believe or feel or want to do something? Very important. And what is missing from this text? This is the most dangerous thing in news, because the news reporter can report something wrong and you can check it. But if they don't report it, what can you do? That's right, nothing. But you can try to check several different news sources on the same topic to see if some mention some things that other news sources do not mention. Or maybe you know something about it that is not being mentioned, like in an alcohol commercial, or beer or some sort of alcohol. They don't tell you how many people per year die in traffic accidents after drinking their product. Hey, you know what? 100,000 people died from drinking XYZ liquor. So please buy it. No, it wouldn't work because the way that it was trying to get you to buy their liquor wouldn't work. So what's the perspective? This is very much related to who wrote it or where it came from. The perspective, what does that mean? Well, I told you how to look it up. Right click, and it says define perspective. Drawing solid objects, no. A particular attitude or way of something. Okay, so this is a way something is. So what is the attitude of the author or the way the author is? Where is he coming from? What's his angle? They always say things like that. And what's the author's way of thinking? So if the author is an animal rights activist, naturally the author is always going to say something in favor of animals. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I say 10 questions. Why do I say 10? Because maybe it's so important you should ask yourself these questions twice. Once maybe before and once after you read the article or once after you see it. We're going to do a little bit more practice on this next time. But in the meantime, I want you to try to ask yourself these questions. All right. And we're going to practice that too. So when you're thinking about these questions, you also have to think that people have self-interest. Well, what in the world is self-interest? Self-interest is, you look out for yourself. It's very difficult not to. If there's a bad earthquake or tornado or something, you're not going to look toward your neighbor and try to give them shelter first. You're going to run for shelter for your own self. If you don't believe me, you can look at some of the aftermath of, some tragedies. People are running, every person for themselves. Very few have their arm around somebody else unless it's a family member. And if it's a family member, that's your self-interest. So anyway, I want to show you a little bit about self-interest and how early maybe we learn it. Watch this.
Yeah, what's this? Did you think this was a good idea?
Watch the boy's face when his dad asked him who did it. Watch his eyes.
Who got the paint out?
See that? Did you see that? Watch this.
Who got the paint out?
There it is. Self-interest. His father gave him a way out. So we know that both of you are painting, but maybe it's about who got the paint out. So who got the paint out? Look at that. And he's just wondering, is his brother going to give him up? So, and these are brothers. Self-interest. He didn't want to get punished, so he gave his brother up. Oh, even the thumb.
How'd he get it?
He's like saying, no way, I didn't do it. Anyway, that's enough of that. You can see that self-interest is learned very, very early in life. And I'm not saying that everybody is always out for themselves. I'm just saying that you can't help but think about what a person or organization, a person who wrote it, organization, where did it come from? You can't help but think that they have some interest in what they're writing or what they're telling you. Some interest that maybe benefits them. Even if they're telling you about like a news station that's telling you a wonderful story about an old guy that knits hats for children who have cancer. And that's a very wonderful, heartwarming story. But then again, you're going to watch more of that television show, and you're going to see more of their advertisements, and they're going to make more money too. So maybe their self-interest was also involved in showing you that heartwarming story. All right. So what is rhetoric? Google defines rhetoric as the art of persuasive speaking or writing. So it's trying to persuade somebody to do something through speaking or writing. Basically, a lot of things. Advertisement, newspaper, you know. If it's a newspaper article, they're trying to persuade you that what they're saying is true, right? Or at least you should believe it at face value. I don't think so. Not anymore. So when we look at the way somebody writes something or a speech that somebody gives, there are three things that you have to consider. You have to consider who the speaker is, who the audience members are, and what the message is, or what the purpose is. What is the purpose of this message? And then you can see three things here: pathos, ethos, and logos. I'm going to quickly go over this because in the next video we're going to practice more. Now, when you use ethos, these are Greek words that Aristotle and Socrates and that used when they were having their great discussions and developing their philosophies. Ethos is an appeal to somebody's ethics, or saying that I'm an expert because I have a degree in education, or because I have experience fighting fires. I am a firefighter. And it means convincing the reader or listener or character of the credibility of the person who's trying to persuade them. So if I'm trying to say, hey, you need to listen to me, I'm a teacher. Of course, you can't say it like that because it would be very difficult. You have to be a little bit more crafty than that when you write. But you can introduce yourself. My name is Keith Rains. I have a master's degree in reading and language arts and a reading certificate. I have a 4.0. I'm on Phi Kappa Phi. You know, you can go on and on about your credential or what makes you experienced. I have 15, 20 years experience teaching foreign language and all kinds of different things. You could try to build up the ethos of your paper. And when they look at ethos, they look at it as the person speaking. However, when you're writing something, you can quote somebody else and give ethos to your paper. In other words, I'm not an expert, but this doctor says this. Okay? Pathos is using emotion to convince people. Now, I know that my mother was very good at this. She would be like, you're going to eat the last popsicle out of the refrigerator? And what if your brother or sister wants some? And they didn't get any, and they're hot too, and tired and cold, and whatever. She just kept making me feel bad. And so, wouldn't you prefer to share it with your brother and sister? I'd be like, yes. And so she used emotion, my own emotion, to get me to feel sorry for my brother and sister not being fast enough to eat that popsicle. Anyway, so you can use this in a paper. But here's something I want to tell you. You need to be careful of this because Just because somebody shows you a sad story doesn't mean you have to believe what they're saying. Sometimes people try to move you to laugh or to cry to believe the next thing they're about to say. So be very careful when you see this happening to you. And we're going to go over some examples. Logos. This is an appeal to logic. And they're saying, you know, if A looks like B and A sounds like B and A is the same exactly as B with all the DNA, then A is the same species as B. And they are related. So this is trying to build a logical progression and a reasoning how you got to your conclusion. This is probably the most difficult thing because people can always argue your logic, even if you think it's very sound. All right, that's enough for today. The quiz is going to ask you some of these things on the notes, and I hope you have a great day. Goodbye. Alt-Tab. Stop.